The wind howled through the narrow streets of Deadwood, South Dakota, carrying with it a bitter cold that sank into bone and marrow. And Gwendolyn Lawson pressed herself against the general store's wooden wall, watching the cowboys ride past without so much as a glance in her direction. It was December 1876, and the gold rush town was still teeming with fortune seekers. But Gwendolyn had discovered that her own fortune seemed destined to remain forever out of reach. She pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling the old familiar sting of rejection settle in her chest like a stone. "You best get yourself inside before you freeze to death," called Mrs. Henderson from the doorway of her boarding house across the street. The older woman's expression held more pity than kindness, and Gwendolyn hated that look almost as much as she hated the cold. "Though I suppose standing out there is as good a place as any to catch a man's eye, not that it will do you much good." Gwendolyn ignored the comment and walked down the street toward the small room she rented above the seamstress shop. Her boots crunched through the packed snow, and her breath formed white clouds in the frigid air. She was 22 years old, which in this frontier town meant she was already considered past her prime for marriage. But it was not her age that made the townspeople whisper behind their hands and shake their heads when she passed. It was the way she looked, the way she carried herself, the fact that she refused to simper and giggle like the younger girls who had already caught themselves husbands. Gwendolyn had arrived in Deadwood 6 months earlier with nothing but a small trunk of belongings and a determination to make a new life for herself. Her parents had died in a fire back in Philadelphia, and she had no other family to speak of. The inheritance they left her had been enough to pay for passage west and a few months of rent, but little else. She had taken work as a seamstress, and while her skills with needle and thread were considerable, the wages were barely enough to keep her fed and housed. The other women in town had made their opinions clear from the start. Gwendolyn was too tall, too plain, too serious. Her auburn hair refused to curl prettily no matter how she tried to style it, and her features, while not unpleasant, lacked the delicate prettiness that men seemed to favor. More than that, she had opinions and was not afraid to voice them. She read books and newspapers when she could get her hands on them, and she had no patience for the kind of helpless fluttering that seemed to attract male attention. "No cowboy is going to want a woman like you, Mrs. Henderson had told her just last week, her voice full of false sympathy. "Especially not in weather like this. Men want someone who can keep them warm at night, someone soft and sweet. You are all angles and opinions, girl. You best reconcile yourself to a life alone." The words had cut deeper than Gwendolyn wanted to admit. She had lain awake that night in her cold room, listening to the wind rattle the windows, wondering if Mrs. Henderson was right. Maybe she was destined to live out her days as a spinster, sewing other women's wedding dresses and christening gowns while she herself remained forever on the outside looking in. But Gwendolyn had not survived the loss of her parents and the journey west only to give up now. She had learned to be resilient, to keep moving forward even when everything seemed hopeless. So she worked her needle through fabric day after day, saved every penny she could, and tried not to let the loneliness consume her. It was on a particularly frigid morning in early January 1877 that everything changed. Gwendolyn had ventured out to the general store to purchase thread, wrapping herself in every layer she owned. The temperature had dropped so low that even the hardiest miners were staying close to their stoves, and the streets were nearly deserted. She hurried along the wooden sidewalk, her eyes watering from the cold, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. She stepped aside to let the rider pass, but instead of continuing down the street, the horse came to a stop beside her. Gwendolyn looked up, expecting to see one of the town's familiar faces, but the man sitting astride the large bay gelding was a stranger. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his worn hat. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with strong features and eyes so blue they seemed to pierce right through her. He wore the typical clothing of a working cowboy: leather chaps over wool trousers, a heavy coat, and a bandana tied around his neck. But there was something different about him, something in the way he carried himself that commanded attention. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat. His voice was deep and rough, like whiskey over gravel. "You should not be out in this weather. It is dangerous cold." Gwendolyn bristled at the unsolicited advice. "I am perfectly capable of judging whether or not I can handle the cold, thank you." Instead of taking offense at her sharp tone, the stranger smiled. It was a slow, genuine smile that transformed his entire face and made something flutter unexpectedly in Gwendolyn's chest. "I am sure you are," he said, "but that does not mean you should have to. Where are you headed?" "The general store," Gwendolyn replied, then immediately wondered why she had answered him. She did not owe this stranger any explanations. "That is where I was headed myself," he said. "Would you allow me to give you a ride? Your lips are turning blue." Gwendolyn hesitated. Every rule of propriety said she should refuse, but the cold was truly brutal, and the store was still 3 blocks away. Besides, propriety had never done much for her anyway. "Very well," she said finally. The stranger dismounted in one smooth motion and held out his hand to help her up into the saddle. His grip was strong and warm even through his gloves, and Gwendolyn felt a jolt of something she could not quite name as he lifted her easily onto the horse's back. He swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to hold the reins, and Gwendolyn found herself enveloped in warmth and the scent of leather and pine. "I am Isaiah Vaughn," he said as they started moving down the street at a walk. "I just arrived in town yesterday." "Gwendolyn Lawson," she replied, acutely aware of how close he was sitting, how solid and real he felt behind her. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Miss Lawson," Isaiah said, and something in his tone made her believe he actually meant it, "though I wish it were under warmer circumstances." They reached the general store in what felt like both an eternity and no time at all. Isaiah dismounted first, then reached up to help Gwendolyn down. His hands spanned her waist easily, and he lowered her to the ground with a gentleness that surprised her. For a moment they stood very close, and Gwendolyn found herself looking up into those startling blue eyes. "Thank you for the ride," she managed to say. "It was my pleasure," Isaiah replied. Then he did something unexpected. Instead of releasing her and walking away, he offered her his arm. "May I escort you inside? I would hate for you to slip on the ice." Gwendolyn knew she should refuse. She knew that accepting his continued attention would only lead to disappointment when he learned what the rest of the town already knew about her. But something in his earnest expression made her nod and take his arm. Inside the store, she conducted her business quickly, purchasing the thread she needed while trying to ignore the curious looks from Mr. Peterson, the store owner, and the 2 other customers. Isaiah stood patiently beside her, occasionally picking up items from the shelves and examining them. When she had finished, he purchased his own supplies: coffee, beans, tobacco, and ammunition. "Are you passing through?" Gwendolyn asked as they waited for Mr. Peterson to wrap their purchases. "No," Isaiah said. "I am here to stay, at least for a while. I have taken a job at the Double V Ranch about 5 miles outside of town. I will be helping with the cattle through the winter and spring." The Double V Ranch was one of the larger operations in the area, owned by the Vanderburg family. It was good, steady work for a cowboy, which meant Isaiah would be around for at least several months. Gwendolyn felt an unexpected flutter of hope, which she immediately tried to suppress. They left the store together, and Isaiah insisted on walking her back to the seamstress shop, despite her protests that she could manage on her own. The wind had picked up even more, and snow had begun to fall in thick, heavy flakes. By the time they reached her building, visibility had decreased significantly. "This is where I live," Gwendolyn said, pointing to the stairs that led up to her room. Isaiah looked at the rickety wooden structure with obvious concern. "Is it warm enough up there?" "It is adequate," Gwendolyn replied, which was not exactly true. The room was drafty and cold, and she often woke up with frost on the inside of her windows. But it was shelter, and it was hers, and she was not about to complain to a stranger about her circumstances. Isaiah studied her face for a long moment, and Gwendolyn had the unsettling feeling that he could see right through her brave facade. "Miss Lawson," he said slowly, "I hope you will not think me too forward, but I would very much like to call on you if you would permit it." Gwendolyn stared at him in shock. Men did not ask to call on her. Men did not even seem to see her most of the time, let alone express interest in courting her. "Why?" she blurted out before she could stop herself. Isaiah looked puzzled by the question. "Why?" "Because I would like to get to know you better. Because in the short time we have spent together, I have found you to be intelligent and forthright, and I admire that. Because I think you have a beautiful smile, even though I have only seen it once." "You should know," Gwendolyn said, her voice coming out sharper than she intended, "that the people in this town do not think very highly of me. They say I am too tall, too plain, too opinionated. They say no cowboy would want a woman like me, especially in weather like this." She expected him to make his excuses and walk away. That was what any sensible man would do when confronted with such a dire warning. But Isaiah just tilted his head slightly, his blue eyes never leaving her face. "You know what I say to that?" he asked softly. Gwendolyn shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. "I say that I have been searching for you," Isaiah said, and the simple sincerity in his voice made Gwendolyn's breath catch in her throat. "I have been searching for a woman who speaks her mind, who stands tall instead of making herself small, who does not need to pretend to be something she is not. I have been searching for someone real, Miss Lawson, and I think I may have just found her." Gwendolyn felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of this man, no matter how much his words affected her. "You do not even know me," she whispered. "Then let me get to know you," Isaiah replied, "if you are willing." Gwendolyn looked into his eyes and saw nothing but honest interest and warmth. Against all her better judgment, against everything experience had taught her about protecting her heart, she found herself nodding. "Yes," she said. "Yes, you may call on me." The smile that broke across Isaiah's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Then I will see you soon, Miss Lawson. Very soon." He tipped his hat to her, then turned and walked back to where he had tied his horse, disappearing into the swirling snow. Gwendolyn climbed the stairs to her room in a daze. Once inside, she leaned against the door and let out a long, shaky breath. What had just happened? Had she really just agreed to let that man court her? Had he really said those things to her, or had she imagined the entire encounter? But no, the thread she had purchased was still clutched in her hand, proof that the morning had been real. Isaiah Vaughn was real, and he had said he had been searching for her. Gwendolyn moved to her small window and looked out at the snowy street below. For the first time in months, the cold did not seem quite so bitter. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope. The next few days passed with agonizing slowness. The storm that had been threatening finally hit with full force, dumping several feet of snow on Deadwood and making travel nearly impossible. Gwendolyn spent her time sewing and trying not to think about Isaiah, which proved to be an impossible task. She found herself wondering what he was doing out at the ranch, whether he was warm enough, whether he was thinking about her too. Mrs. Henderson stopped by the seamstress shop on the third day, ostensibly to have a dress mended but really to gossip. "I heard you were seen with that new cowboy," she said, her eyes bright with malicious curiosity. "Isaiah Vaughn, I think his name is. Handsome enough, I suppose, if you like the rough type." Gwendolyn kept her eyes on her stitching. "He gave me a ride to the general store when the weather was bad." It was nothing more than common courtesy. Mrs. Henderson said, clearly disappointed by this response. "Well, do not get your hopes up, dear. Men like that are just passing through. They never stay, and they certainly never settle down with women like you. Women like me." Gwendolyn repeated, finally looking up. "What exactly do you mean by that, Mrs. Henderson?" The older woman had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "You know what I mean. You are not exactly the type of woman who inspires lasting devotion. You are too—" She waved her hand vaguely. "Too much of everything and not enough of what matters." Gwendolyn set down her sewing with deliberate care. "I think your dress is finished, Mrs. Henderson. That will be 50 cents. After the woman left, Gwendolyn allowed herself a few minutes of fury. How dare these people make judgments about her worth? How dare they decide what she deserved and did not deserve? But the anger faded quickly, replaced by a familiar sadness. Because the truth was, part of her believed what they said. Part of her believed she was unworthy of love, that there was something fundamentally wrong with her that made her undesirable. The storm finally broke on the fourth day, leaving Deadwood buried under pristine white snow that sparkled in the bright winter sunlight. Gwendolyn was in the middle of hemming a skirt when she heard boots on the stairs outside. Her heart leaped into her throat, but she told herself it was probably just Mrs. Peterson coming to pick up her order. Then came a knock on the door, and when she opened it, Isaiah Vaughn stood there, his cheeks red from the cold, snow dusting his shoulders, and a smile on his face that made her knees feel weak. "Miss Lawson," he said, sweeping his hat from his head, "I apologize for the delay in calling on you. The storm made it impossible to get into town." "I understand," Gwendolyn said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Would you like to come in?" Isaiah hesitated. "That would not be proper unless you have a chaperone." "I have no one," Gwendolyn admitted, "but we could leave the door open and Mrs. Peterson's shop is just downstairs. She would hear if I called out." Isaiah considered this, then nodded. "Very well, but only for a few minutes. I do not want to damage your reputation." Gwendolyn almost laughed at that. What reputation did she have to damage? But she stepped aside and let him enter. The room suddenly felt much smaller with him in it. Isaiah looked around at her sparse furnishings. The narrow bed, the small stove, the trunk that held her belongings, the table where she did her sewing. "You live here alone?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I do," Gwendolyn replied. "It is not much, but it is mine." Isaiah walked to the window and examined the frost on the glass. "It is too cold in here. You need more blankets, a better stove." "I make do with what I have," Gwendolyn said, feeling defensive. "I do not need charity." Isaiah turned to face her, his expression serious. "It is not charity to care about someone's well-being, Miss Lawson, and I find that I care very much about yours." The directness of his statement left Gwendolyn momentarily speechless. She was saved from having to respond by Isaiah clearing his throat and changing the subject. "I came to ask if you would do me the honor of accompanying me to dinner tomorrow evening," he said. "There is a new restaurant that opened up on Main Street. Nothing fancy, but I hear the food is good." "I would like that," Gwendolyn said, and was surprised by how much she meant it. "Excellent," Isaiah said, and the warmth in his eyes made her feel like she was standing next to a fire instead of in her freezing room. "I will call for you at 6 o'clock if that suits you." After he left, Gwendolyn sat down on her bed and pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks. This was really happening. Isaiah Vaughn was courting her. He had come through a snowstorm to see her, had asked her to dinner, had looked at her like she was someone precious and worth knowing. The next evening, Gwendolyn dressed with more care than she had in months. She wore her best dress, a deep green wool that brought out the color of her eyes, and she pinned her hair up in a style she hoped looked elegant rather than severe. At precisely 6 o'clock, Isaiah arrived, looking handsome in clean clothes and a freshly shaved jaw. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the way he said it made Gwendolyn believe he actually meant it. They walked together through the snowy streets to the restaurant, a small establishment called the Golden Nugget. It was crowded with miners and cowboys seeking hot meals, but the owner found them a table in the corner that offered some privacy. Isaiah helped Gwendolyn with her chair, a gesture of courtesy that made her feel like a lady instead of a spinster seamstress. Over plates of beef stew and fresh bread, they talked. Isaiah told her about his life, how he had grown up on a ranch in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers. His parents had died when he was 16, and he had spent the years since then working as a cowboy, moving from ranch to ranch, never quite finding a place that felt like home. "Why Deadwood?" Gwendolyn asked. "Why come all the way up to South Dakota in the middle of winter?" Isaiah was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "I was in Cheyenne when I heard about the job at the Double V," he said finally. "And something just told me I needed to come here. I cannot explain it exactly, but it felt like I was being pulled in this direction." He looked up at her, his blue eyes intense. "Now I know why." Gwendolyn felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You cannot possibly mean that. You barely know me." "I know enough," Isaiah said. "I know that you are brave enough to come west on your own, strong enough to make a life for yourself in a hard place. I know that you speak the truth even when it might be easier to stay silent. I know that your eyes light up when you talk about books, and that you have a small scar on your left hand from when you accidentally stabbed yourself with a needle." Gwendolyn looked down at her hand in surprise. She had not realized he had noticed such a small detail. "You are very observant." "Only when it comes to things that matter," Isaiah replied. They stayed at the restaurant for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Gwendolyn told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about her parents and how much she missed them. She told him about her dreams of one day having a dress shop of her own, a place where women could come and feel beautiful regardless of their size or shape or station in life. "You will do it," Isaiah said with such conviction that Gwendolyn almost believed him. "You will make it happen because you do not give up. That is one of the things I admire most about you." When he finally walked her home, the streets were quiet and dark, lit only by the moon reflecting off the snow. At her door, Isaiah took her hands in his. "May I see you again soon?" he asked. "Yes," Gwendolyn said. "I would like that very much." Isaiah lifted one of her hands to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned and courtly, and it made Gwendolyn's heart race. "Good night, Miss Lawson," he said softly. "Good night," Gwendolyn whispered, and watched as he walked away into the darkness. Over the next few weeks, Isaiah called on Gwendolyn whenever he could get away from the ranch. Sometimes he took her to dinner. Sometimes they simply walked through town together, talking and laughing. Gwendolyn found herself opening up to him in ways she never had with anyone else. He was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions, and he never once made her feel like she needed to be anyone other than exactly who she was. The townspeople noticed, of course. They always noticed everything. Mrs. Henderson made pointed comments about not getting too attached. The other women at the church sewing circle whispered behind their hands about how strange it was that such a handsome cowboy would be interested in someone like Gwendolyn. "Maybe he is desperate," one of them suggested. "Maybe he feels sorry for her," said another. "Maybe he is just passing time until something better comes along," concluded a third. Gwendolyn tried not to let their words affect her, but they burrowed under her skin like splinters. Late at night, lying alone in her cold room, she found herself wondering if they were right. Why would someone like Isaiah want someone like her? What did she have to offer him? She was poor, plain, and difficult. Surely there were better options for him. Prettier girls who would make more suitable wives. But then Isaiah would arrive at her door with that warm smile, would take her hand and look at her like she was the most important person in his world, and all her doubts would melt away. When she was with him, she felt like the woman she had always wanted to be, confident, valued, loved. It was late February when Isaiah took her on a picnic. The weather had warmed slightly, enough that the snow was melting and the first hints of spring were beginning to show. He borrowed a wagon from the ranch and drove them out to a place he had discovered, a small valley with a creek running through it. The water was partially frozen, but here and there, patches of earth were visible beneath the melting snow. Isaiah spread out a blanket and unpacked the food he had brought: cold chicken, cheese, bread, and even a small bottle of wine. They sat together in the weak winter sunlight, eating and talking and watching the water flow past. "This place is beautiful," Gwendolyn said, looking around at the rolling hills and the vast expanse of sky. "I thought you might like it," Isaiah said. "I come here sometimes when I need to think. It is peaceful." They were quiet for a while, comfortable in each other's presence. Then Isaiah reached out and took Gwendolyn's hand. "There is something I need to tell you," he said, his voice suddenly serious. Gwendolyn's heart sank. Here it was, the moment when he would tell her this had all been a mistake, that he was leaving, that he had realized she was not what he wanted after all. "What is it?" she managed to ask. "I am falling in love with you," Isaiah said, and the words hung in the cold air between them. "I know it has not been very long, but I cannot deny what I feel. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, Gwendolyn. You are strong and smart and beautiful, and being with you makes me feel like I have finally found what I have been searching for all my life." Tears sprang to Gwendolyn's eyes. "Isaiah, you do not have to say anything right now," he interrupted gently. "I just needed you to know. I needed you to understand that this is real for me. You are real for me." Gwendolyn looked into his earnest face and felt something break open inside her chest. All the walls she had built to protect herself, all the defenses she had constructed against disappointment and pain, came crumbling down. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I tried not to. I told myself it was foolish, that it would only end in heartache, but I cannot help it. When I am with you, I feel like myself for the first time in my life." Isaiah pulled her into his arms, and Gwendolyn went willingly, burying her face against his chest. He held her tightly, one hand stroking her hair, and she could feel the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "No one will ever make you feel less than worthy again," he said fiercely. "Not while I am here. You are everything, Gwendolyn, everything I never knew I needed." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, letting the world fade away until there was nothing but the two of them and the promise of something real and lasting. When Isaiah finally took her back to town, the sun was setting, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. At her door, he kissed her for the first time. It was a gentle kiss, tender and sweet, but it held all the promise of deeper passion to come. Gwendolyn felt like her whole body was on fire, like every nerve ending had suddenly come alive. "I will come back tomorrow," Isaiah said when they finally pulled apart. "And the day after that, and the day after that, for as long as you will have me." "Forever," Gwendolyn said without hesitation. "I will have you forever." But life, as Gwendolyn had learned, rarely went according to plan. The next day Isaiah did not come, nor the day after that. By the third day Gwendolyn was consumed with worry. Had something happened to him? Was he hurt? Had he changed his mind about her after all? On the fourth day, she could stand it no longer. She bundled herself in her warmest clothes and hired a wagon to take her out to the Double V Ranch. The driver, an old man named Charlie who sometimes did work for the seamstress shop, gave her curious looks but did not ask questions. The ranch was larger than she had expected, with a sprawling main house, several barns, and numerous outbuildings. Cowboys were working in the corrals, and cattle dotted the snowy fields in the distance. Gwendolyn asked one of the men where she could find Isaiah Vaughn, and he pointed her toward a small cabin set apart from the other buildings. Her heart pounding, Gwendolyn knocked on the door. There was a long pause, then she heard movement inside. When the door opened, Isaiah stood there looking terrible. His face was flushed with fever, his eyes glassy and unfocused. He had clearly been very ill. "Gwendolyn," he said, his voice hoarse and confused, "what are you doing here?" "You did not come," Gwendolyn said, pushing past him into the cabin. It was a mess, with dirty dishes piled up and his bedding tangled on the narrow cot. "How long have you been like this?" "I do not know," Isaiah admitted. He swayed slightly, and Gwendolyn quickly grabbed his arm to steady him. "A few days, I think. I caught a chill out in the fields." Gwendolyn guided him back to the bed and helped him lie down. His skin was burning hot beneath her hands. "You should have sent someone to get help," she said, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. She had seen what fever could do, how quickly it could turn deadly. "Did not want to worry you," Isaiah mumbled, his eyes already closing. "Thought I could handle it on my own." Gwendolyn looked around the cabin, assessing the situation. There was a small stove for heat and cooking, a pump for water and basic supplies. It was not much, but it would have to do. She turned to Charlie, who had followed her to the door. "Can you please go back to town and tell Mrs. Peterson where I am? Tell her I will return when I can." Charlie looked doubtful. "Miss, you cannot stay here alone with him. It is not proper." "I do not care about proper," Gwendolyn said firmly. "He is sick, and he needs someone to take care of him. Now please go tell Mrs. Peterson." After Charlie left, Gwendolyn got to work. She stoked the fire in the stove and pumped fresh water, then set about cleaning up the cabin. She found clean linens in a trunk and changed Isaiah's bedding, noting with concern how he shivered despite the heat radiating from his skin. She made broth from the supplies she found and coaxed him to drink it, spooning it carefully into his mouth when he was too weak to hold the cup himself. For 3 days and nights, Gwendolyn stayed by Isaiah's side. She bathed his forehead with cool cloths when the fever spiked, wrapped him in blankets when the chills came. She made him drink water and broth, cleaned him when he was too weak to do it himself, and sat by his bed reading aloud from a book of poetry she found among his belongings when he seemed restless. Some of the other ranch hands checked on them occasionally, bringing food and wood for the fire. They looked at Gwendolyn with respect rather than judgment, seeming to understand that she was exactly where she needed to be. On the fourth day, the fever finally broke. Isaiah woke up clear-eyed and lucid, looking around the clean cabin in confusion before his gaze settled on Gwendolyn. She was sitting in a chair beside his bed, her head resting on her folded arms on the mattress, fast asleep from exhaustion. "Gwendolyn," Isaiah said softly, reaching out to touch her hair. She stirred and sat up, blinking sleepily. When she saw that he was awake and alert, relief flooded through her so powerfully that she felt dizzy. "You are better," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You stayed," Isaiah said wonderingly. "You took care of me." "Of course I did," Gwendolyn replied. "Did you think I would not?" Isaiah reached for her hand and held it tightly. "You could have gotten sick yourself. You should not have risked it." "You are worth the risk," Gwendolyn said simply. "All the risk in the world." Isaiah pulled her down to sit on the edge of the bed, then drew her into his arms. "Marry me," he said against her hair. "I know it is too soon. I know I should wait and court you properly for months, but I cannot. I almost died these past few days, and all I could think about when I was lost in the fever was that I had not asked you to be my wife. Marry me, Gwendolyn, please." Gwendolyn pulled back to look at him, searching his face to make sure the fever had not returned and was making him say things he did not mean. But his eyes were clear and steady, full of love and certainty. "Yes," she said, and then laughed at the joy that lit up his face. "Yes, Isaiah, I will marry you." He kissed her then, a deep kiss that held all the passion and promise of the life they would build together. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless and smiling. "As soon as I am strong enough, we will go to town and speak to the minister," Isaiah said. "I do not want to wait any longer than necessary to make you my wife." "People will talk," Gwendolyn warned him. "They will say you are making a mistake, that you could do better." Isaiah cupped her face in his hands, his expression fierce. "Let them talk. They do not know you like I know you. They do not see what I see when I look at you. You are everything I have ever wanted, Gwendolyn. You are brave and kind and true. You are the woman I have been searching for, and I thank God every day that I found you in this cold, hard place." Gwendolyn felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were tears of happiness. For so long she had believed that she was unworthy of love, that there was something fundamentally wrong with her that made her undeserving of a man's affection. But Isaiah had shown her that those beliefs were lies. He had seen her exactly as she was, with all her sharp edges and difficult opinions, and he had loved her not in spite of those things but because of them. It took Isaiah another week to recover his strength fully. During that time, Gwendolyn returned to town but visited the ranch every day, bringing him food and companionship. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Deadwood, and the reactions were exactly what Gwendolyn had expected. Mrs. Henderson was scandalized. "You barely know the man." "What if he is just after your money?" Gwendolyn could not help but laugh at that. "What money? I barely have enough to pay my rent." "Well, what if he is running from the law? What if he has a wife somewhere else?" "Then I suppose I will deal with that if it happens," Gwendolyn said calmly. "But I trust Isaiah and I love him. That is enough for me." Some of the other women were kinder if still doubtful. "Are you sure about this, dear?" asked Mrs. Peterson. "Marriage is forever, and winter makes people do strange things. Come spring, he might feel differently." But Gwendolyn had never been more certain of anything in her life. Isaiah loved her, truly loved her, and she loved him with an intensity that sometimes frightened her. She had spent so long being alone, protecting herself from hurt, that the vulnerability of loving someone was both terrifying and exhilarating. They were married on a cold but clear day in early March 1877. The ceremony took place in the small church at the edge of town, with only a handful of people in attendance. The rancher who owned the Double V, a gruff but kind man named Tobias Vanderburg, served as Isaiah's witness. Mrs. Peterson, in a gesture of unexpected kindness, served as Gwendolyn's. Gwendolyn wore a dress she had made herself from blue wool, with white lace at the collar and cuffs. It was not fancy, but it was well made and it fit her perfectly. Isaiah wore his best clothes, freshly cleaned and pressed, and he could not stop smiling as he watched Gwendolyn walk down the aisle toward him. The minister, an elderly man named Reverend Clark, performed the ceremony with solemn dignity. When it came time for the vows, Isaiah spoke as clearly and firmly, his eyes never leaving Gwendolyn's face. "I, Isaiah Vaughn, take you, Gwendolyn Lawson, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death do us part." Gwendolyn repeated the vows, her voice strong despite the tears in her eyes. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Isaiah kissed her with such tenderness that several people in the small congregation had to wipe their own eyes. After the ceremony, Tobias Vanderberg surprised them by offering them the use of a small house on the ranch property. "It is not much," he said gruffly, "but it is better than that cabin Isaiah has been living in. Consider it a wedding gift and my way of thanking you both for your good work." The house was small but sturdy, with 2 rooms and a proper fireplace. It had clearly been empty for some time, but it had good bones and a solid roof. Isaiah carried Gwendolyn over the threshold, and they stood together in the middle of the main room, looking around at what would be their first real home together. "We can make this beautiful," Gwendolyn said, already imagining curtains for the windows and rugs for the floor. "It will take work, but we can do it." "We can do anything together," Isaiah said, pulling her into his arms. "You and me against the world." That night, in the warmth of their marriage bed, Isaiah made love to Gwendolyn with a gentleness and passion that took her breath away. He worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, telling her over and over how beautiful she was, how precious, how loved. And Gwendolyn, who had spent so long feeling like she was not enough, finally understood what it meant to be truly cherished. In the days and weeks that followed, they settled into married life. Isaiah worked long hours at the ranch, helping with the cattle and the various tasks that needed doing. Gwendolyn continued her sewing work, but now she could do it from home, which she much preferred to the cold room above the seamstress shop. She made curtains and cushions for their little house, transforming it bit by bit into a cozy home. They had little money, but they had each other, and that was enough. On cold evenings, they would sit together by the fire, Isaiah reading the newspaper aloud while Gwendolyn sewed, or sometimes just holding each other and talking about their dreams for the future. "I want to have children with you," Isaiah said one night, his hand resting on Gwendolyn's stomach. "A whole house full of them if we are blessed." "I would like that," Gwendolyn said softly, "though I must admit the idea frightens me a little. What if I am not a good mother?" Isaiah turned to look at her, his expression serious. "You will be an excellent mother. You are kind and patient and strong. Our children will be lucky to have you." "And they will be lucky to have you as a father," Gwendolyn replied, leaning into his warmth. "You are the best man I have ever known, Isaiah Vaughn." Spring came slowly to South Dakota that year, the snow melting in fits and starts as the days gradually grew longer and warmer. Gwendolyn planted a garden behind their house, putting in seeds for vegetables and even a few flowers. Isaiah built her a chicken coop, and they acquired 4 hens who provided fresh eggs every day. Life was good, better than Gwendolyn had ever dared to hope. But she was still learning to trust in that goodness, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. She could not quite shake the feeling that it was all too perfect, that something would come along to destroy their happiness. Her fears seemed to be realized one afternoon in late April, when a woman rode into the ranch yard on a fine black horse. She was beautiful, with golden hair and delicate features, dressed in expensive riding clothes that marked her as someone of means. Gwendolyn watched from the window as the woman dismounted and began talking to Isaiah, who had been working on repairing a fence. The woman was clearly familiar with him, touching his arm as she spoke, smiling up at him in a way that made Gwendolyn's stomach clench with jealousy and fear. She told herself not to jump to conclusions, but old insecurities were hard to shake. Was this someone from Isaiah's past? Was he having second thoughts about their marriage? When Isaiah brought the woman to the house, introducing her as Catherine Vanderburg, Tobias's daughter who had been away visiting family in Denver, Gwendolyn forced herself to be polite. Catherine was charming and friendly, complimenting Gwendolyn on her home and expressing delight at the news of their marriage. "Father wrote to me about it," she said, accepting the cup of tea Gwendolyn offered her. "He said Isaiah had married a lovely seamstress from town. I am so pleased to finally meet you." But there was something in the way Catherine looked at Isaiah, a possessiveness that set Gwendolyn's teeth on edge. After the woman left, riding back toward the main house, Gwendolyn could not help but ask, "Did you know her before?" "When you first came to the ranch," Isaiah, who had been washing his hands at the pump, turned to look at her in surprise. "I met her once very briefly when I first interviewed for the job. She was visiting the ranch for a day before heading to Denver. Why do you ask?" "No reason," Gwendolyn said, trying to keep her voice light. "She is very beautiful." Isaiah dried his hands and came to stand in front of her, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "She is," he agreed simply. "And it means absolutely nothing to me. You are my wife, Gwendolyn. You are the woman I chose, the woman I love. No one else exists for me in that way, not Catherine Vanderburg or anyone else." "I know," Gwendolyn said. "I am sorry. I do not know why I even asked." "Yes, you do," Isaiah said gently. "You are afraid. You are afraid that I will realize I made a mistake, that I will want someone prettier or softer or easier. But Gwendolyn, listen to me." He cupped her face in his hands, his blue eyes intense. "I did not marry you because I could not find anyone else. I did not marry you out of pity or desperation. I married you because you are the only woman in the world I want. You are the one I have been searching for all my life, and nothing will ever change that." Gwendolyn felt the knot of anxiety in her chest loosen. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Isaiah said, and kissed her until all her doubts melted away. But Catherine Vanderburg proved to be a persistent problem. She began finding reasons to visit their house frequently, always dropping by when she knew Isaiah would be there. She would ask for his help with her horse, or invite them both to dinner at the main house, or simply stop by to chat. She was never overtly inappropriate, but Gwendolyn could sense the woman's interest in her husband. The situation came to a head one evening in May when Catherine invited them to a party at the main house to celebrate her return from Denver. The house was filled with wealthy ranchers and their families, and Gwendolyn felt out of place in her simple dress among all the finery. Catherine, beautiful in a gown of rose silk, was the center of attention, holding court in the parlor while musicians played and guests danced. Gwendolyn watched as Catherine maneuvered Isaiah into dancing with her, saw how the woman pressed herself close to him, laughing and smiling up into his face. The old fears came rushing back, whispering that she was not good enough, that Isaiah would eventually see what everyone else saw and realize his mistake. She slipped out onto the porch, needing air and space to compose herself. The night was warm, with stars bright overhead and the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. She stood at the railing, taking deep breaths, trying to talk herself down from the panic threatening to overwhelm her. "There you are," Isaiah's voice came from behind her. "I have been looking for you." Gwendolyn did not turn around. "You should go back inside. Catherine will be wondering where you are." Isaiah came to stand beside her at the railing. "I do not care what Catherine wonders. I care about you." "What is wrong?" "Nothing," Gwendolyn said, but her voice broke on the word. Isaiah turned her to face him, his expression concerned. "Talk to me," he said, "please." And so Gwendolyn did. She told him about her fears, about feeling inadequate and out of place, about worrying that he would regret choosing her. The words tumbled out in a rush, all the insecurities she had been holding inside finally spilling over. Isaiah listened without interrupting, and when she finally fell silent, he pulled her into his arms and held her tightly. "I am going to tell you something," he said, his voice steady and sure. "And I need you to really hear me, Gwendolyn. You are not inadequate. You are not less than anyone else. You are my wife, my partner, my love. Catherine Vanderburg could throw herself at me every day for the rest of my life, and I would never be interested, because she is not you." "But she is so beautiful," Gwendolyn whispered against his chest. "So refined and elegant, everything I am not." "She is those things," Isaiah agreed. "But she is also superficial and manipulative. She sees me as a challenge, a conquest. She does not know me, not really, but you do. You have seen me at my worst, sick and weak and helpless, and you stayed. You took care of me. You made a home with me. That is what matters, Gwendolyn. Not beauty or refinement or any of those other shallow things. What matters is that we love each other, that we choose each other every single day." Gwendolyn looked up at him, seeing the absolute certainty in his face. "I am sorry," she said. "I know I should not doubt you. I know you have never given me reason to." "You have every reason to doubt," Isaiah said gently. "People have been telling you that you are not good enough your entire life. It will take time to undo that damage. But I am here, and I am not going anywhere. We will work through this together as many times as you need, until you truly believe that you are worthy of love." They went back inside together, and Isaiah made a point of staying by Gwendolyn's side for the rest of the evening. When Catherine tried to claim another dance, he politely but firmly declined, saying he only wanted to dance with his wife. The message was clear, and Catherine, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger, finally got the hint. As they walked home later that night, the moon lighting their way, Gwendolyn felt lighter than she had in weeks. "Thank you," she said to Isaiah, "for choosing me." "Always," Isaiah replied, squeezing her hand. "Always and forever." The summer months passed in a blur of work and happiness. The garden Gwendolyn had planted flourished, providing them with fresh vegetables. Isaiah was given more responsibility at the ranch, along with a small increase in wages. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. In late June, Gwendolyn realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first she thought it was just stress or the change in her living situation, but when the nausea started, she knew. She was carrying Isaiah's child. She decided to tell him on a Sunday afternoon when he had finished his work for the day. They were sitting together on the porch steps, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby," she said softly. Isaiah went very still, his eyes wide with wonder. "Truly, truly," Gwendolyn confirmed, and then laughed as he let out a whoop of joy and swept her up into his arms, spinning her around. "We are going to be parents," he said, setting her down gently and dropping to his knees in front of her. He pressed his face against her stomach, his arms wrapped around her waist. "I am going to be a father." Gwendolyn ran her fingers through his hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "You are going to be a wonderful father." The pregnancy was not easy. Gwendolyn suffered from terrible morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and the heat of the summer made her feel constantly exhausted. But Isaiah was endlessly patient and supportive, taking over more of the household chores and making sure she rested as much as possible. In the evenings, he would talk to her growing belly, telling their unborn child about his day, reading aloud from the newspaper, singing old cowboy songs in his rough but pleasant voice. Gwendolyn would watch him with tears in her eyes, marveling at how lucky she was to have found this man. The baby was due in late February, right around the time they would celebrate their first anniversary. As fall gave way to winter and the first snows began to fall, Gwendolyn felt the child moving inside her, strong kicks and rolls that reassured her everything was progressing as it should. Catherine Vanderburg had finally given up her pursuit of Isaiah and had become engaged to a banker from Rapid City. Gwendolyn felt only relief at the news, glad to have that particular source of stress removed from her life. She and Isaiah settled into a comfortable routine, preparing for the arrival of their baby with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Isaiah built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it until it was smooth and safe. Gwendolyn sewed tiny gowns and blankets, her heart swelling with love for the child she had not yet met. They talked endlessly about names, finally settling on Nathaniel for a boy and Grace for a girl. The winter was harsh, with bitter cold and heavy snows, but their little house stayed warm and cozy. Isaiah made sure there was always plenty of wood for the fire, and Gwendolyn kept soup simmering on the stove. They were content in their small world, just the two of them waiting for the arrival of the third. Gwendolyn's labor began on a snowy night in late February, 2 weeks before her due date. The pain started slowly, and at first she thought they were just the false contractions she had been experiencing for weeks. But as they grew stronger and closer together, she knew the time had come. Isaiah rode through the storm to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. O'Brien, who had delivered dozens of babies in Deadwood. By the time they returned, Gwendolyn was in serious pain, gripping the bedpost and trying to remember to breathe. The labor was long and difficult. Hours passed, turning into a full day and then night again. Gwendolyn had never known such pain existed, had never felt so utterly exhausted. But Mrs. O'Brien was encouraging, and Isaiah never left her side, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering words of love and strength. "You can do this," he said over and over. "You are the strongest person I know. You can do this." Finally, as dawn was breaking on the second day, Gwendolyn felt an overwhelming urge to push. Mrs. O'Brien examined her and nodded. "It is time. On the next pain, I want you to push as hard as you can." Gwendolyn bore down with all her strength, feeling like she was being torn apart. She screamed, not caring who heard, and Isaiah held her hand so tightly she thought her bones might break. "Again," Mrs. O'Brien commanded. "Push." Gwendolyn pushed and pushed and pushed, until suddenly there was a release and a loud, angry wail filled the room. Mrs. O'Brien held up a squalling, red-faced baby, covered in blood and vernix. "It is a boy," she announced, quickly clearing the baby's mouth and nose. "A strong, healthy boy." Isaiah was crying, tears streaming down his face as Mrs. O'Brien wrapped the baby and placed him in Gwendolyn's arms. She looked down at her son, at his tiny face and perfect little fingers, and felt a love so fierce and all-consuming that it took her breath away. "Hello, Nathaniel," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Isaiah leaned over them both, his family, his whole world. "He is perfect," he said in wonder. "He looks just like you." "He has your eyes," Gwendolyn said, seeing the same bright blue staring up at her. They stayed like that for a long time, the three of them wrapped together, while Mrs. O'Brien bustled around cleaning up and making sure Gwendolyn was recovering well. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, and weak winter sunlight was beginning to filter through the windows. The weeks after Nathaniel's birth were both wonderful and exhausting. The baby needed to eat every few hours, and Gwendolyn quickly learned that motherhood was the hardest work she had ever done. But it was also the most rewarding. Every smile, every coo, every tiny milestone filled her with pride and joy. Isaiah was a devoted father, getting up with her for nighttime feedings, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with Nathaniel when the baby was fussy. He would hold his son for hours, just watching him sleep, marveling at the miracle they had created together. "I never knew I could love someone this much," he said one night as they sat together by the fire, Nathaniel asleep in his arms. "I thought I understood love when I married you, but this is something else entirely." "I know," Gwendolyn said, resting her head on his shoulder. "It is terrifying and wonderful all at once." As spring arrived, bringing with it warmer weather and new growth, Nathaniel began to change and develop. He started smiling in response to their voices, reaching for objects with his tiny hands, making sounds that would eventually become words. Gwendolyn had never been happier, never felt more fulfilled. One afternoon in April, she took Nathaniel into town to show him off to Mrs. Peterson and some of the other women who had been kinder to her. Mrs. Henderson was there too, and she peered at the baby with her usual critical eye. "Well, he seems healthy enough," she said grudgingly. "Though raising a child is difficult work, I hope you are up to the challenge." Gwendolyn looked at the older woman and felt nothing but pity. How sad it must be to go through life looking for the negative in everything, never allowing yourself to simply enjoy beauty and happiness. "I am up to any challenge," she said calmly. "I have an excellent partner and we love our son very much. That is all any child really needs." Mrs. Henderson sniffed disapprovingly, but Mrs. Peterson smiled warmly. "You have done well for yourself, Gwendolyn. I will admit, I had my doubts about that cowboy when you first married him, but he has proven me wrong. He is a good man and you two are clearly very happy together." "We are," Gwendolyn agreed, looking down at her sleeping son. "We really are." As the months passed, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Isaiah continued working at the ranch, and Tobias Vanderberg promoted him to foreman, recognizing his skill and dedication. The promotion came with a substantial increase in wages and a larger house closer to the main ranch buildings. It had 3 rooms instead of 2, with a proper kitchen and even indoor plumbing, which was a luxury Gwendolyn had not dared to hope for. They moved in the summer, and Gwendolyn spent happy weeks making the new house into a home. She sewed curtains for every window, planted flowers in the front yard, and set up a proper workspace for her sewing. She had begun taking on more clients, mostly the wives of other ranch workers and some of the women from town. Word had spread that she was skilled and reliable, and the extra income was welcome as their family grew. Nathaniel was walking by his first birthday, a sturdy little boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination. He got into everything, exploring his world with fearless curiosity, and keeping up with him was exhausting. But Gwendolyn would not have traded it for anything. On the evening of their 2nd anniversary, Isaiah surprised her by taking her out to dinner in Deadwood, leaving Nathaniel with Mrs. O'Brien for a few hours. They went back to the Golden Nugget where they had shared their first meal together and sat at the same corner table. "You remember that night?" Isaiah asked, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I was so nervous. I wanted everything to be perfect." "It was perfect," Gwendolyn said. "You were perfect. You made me feel like I mattered, like I was worth something. No one had ever done that before." "You are worth everything," Isaiah said seriously. "These past 2 years have been the best of my life, Gwendolyn. You and Nathaniel, you are my whole world." "And you are ours," Gwendolyn replied, squeezing his hand. I still cannot believe sometimes that this is my life, that I get to wake up next to you every morning, that we have a beautiful son, that we have built this life together." "Believe it," Isaiah said, "because I am never letting you go. You are stuck with me forever, Mrs. Vaughn." "Forever sounds perfect," Gwendolyn said with a smile. They talked late into the evening, reminiscing about their courtship and early days of marriage, making plans for the future. Isaiah wanted to save money to eventually buy their own small ranch, a place where they could raise cattle and horses and give Nathaniel and any future children room to grow and explore. "You want more children?" he asked tentatively. "I know Nathaniel was a difficult birth." "I do," Gwendolyn said without hesitation. "I would love to give him brothers and sisters, a whole house full of children like you said once." Isaiah's face lit up with joy. "Then we will have them, as many as we are blessed with." Their second child, a daughter they named Grace, was born in the spring of 1879. The labor was easier than with Nathaniel, and Grace came into the world pink and perfect, with a head full of dark hair and her father's blue eyes. Nathaniel, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to bath time. Life was full and busy, but it was good. Isaiah thrived in his role as foreman, earning respect from the men who worked under him and trust from Tobias Vanderberg. Gwendolyn's sewing business continued to grow, and she was able to save money toward their dream of owning land of their own. They attended church regularly, and Gwendolyn found herself becoming more integrated into the community. The women who had once whispered about her now sought her out for advice and companionship. She would never forget how they had treated her in those early days, but she chose to forgive and move forward. Life was too short to hold grudges. On a warm summer evening in 1880, Isaiah came home from work with news that would change everything. Tobias Vanderberg was getting older and wanted to retire. He had decided to sell off portions of his ranch to his most trusted workers, offering them excellent terms and the opportunity to own their own land. "He is offering us 200 acres, Isaiah said, his voice shaking with excitement. "Good land, with water and grazing. We could run a small herd of cattle, maybe some horses. It would be ours, Gwendolyn, our own ranch." Gwendolyn felt tears spring to her eyes. This was the dream they had been working toward, the future they had been building. "Can we afford it?" "With the money we have saved and the terms Tobias is offering, yes," Isaiah said. "It will be tight for a while, but we can do it. I know we can." "Then let us do it," Gwendolyn said. "Let us build our own place, our own legacy for our children." They purchased the land in the fall of 1880, and Isaiah immediately began making plans. He would continue working as foreman for Tobias while building up their own herd, gradually transitioning to working their own ranch full-time. It would take years, but they had time and determination on their side. The first thing Isaiah did was build a new house. It was modest but well constructed, with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a parlor. He built it with his own hands with help from some of the other ranch workers, and when it was finished, Gwendolyn cried at the beauty of it. "This is ours," she said, standing in the middle of the empty parlor, her voice echoing off the walls. "This is really ours." "Everything I have is yours," Isaiah said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Everything I am is yours, always." They moved into the new house in the spring of 1881, and Gwendolyn immediately set about making it a home. She hung curtains and arranged furniture, planted a large garden and flowers around the porch. The children had their own room to share, and Gwendolyn set up her sewing space in one of the spare bedrooms. Their third child, a boy they named Samuel, was born that winter. He was a quiet baby, content to watch the world with solemn eyes, so different from Nathaniel's boisterous energy and Grace's cheerful smiles. Gwendolyn loved each of her children fiercely, marveling at how different they all were despite coming from the same parents. The years that followed were not easy. Ranching was hard work, with long hours and uncertain weather. There were droughts that killed the grass and harsh winters that took cattle. There were injuries and setbacks and times when money was so tight that Gwendolyn worried how they would make ends meet. But through it all, they had each other. Isaiah worked from dawn until dusk, but he always made time for his family. He played with the children, helped Gwendolyn with household chores, and never once complained about the long hours or difficult work. And Gwendolyn supported him in every way she could, managing the household, keeping the books for the ranch, and continuing her sewing to bring in extra income. By 1885, the ranch was thriving. They had built up a respectable herd of cattle and even acquired some horses. Isaiah hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young cowboys who reminded Gwendolyn of Isaiah when she had first met him. The children were growing like weeds. Nathaniel was 8 years old and already helping his father with ranch work. Grace was 6, a bright and curious girl who loved to read and help her mother in the garden. Samuel was 4, still quiet but showing signs of his father's skill with animals. Gwendolyn was pregnant again, her 4th child due in the early spring. She was 31 years old now, and while the pregnancy was harder on her body than the previous ones had been, she was happy and healthy. Isaiah worried about her constantly, trying to get her to rest more, but Gwendolyn insisted on maintaining her usual routines as much as possible. Their 4th child, another daughter they named Eleanor, was born on a beautiful morning in March 1886. She had auburn hair like her mother and a temper to match, announcing her arrival with loud, indignant wails. The older children were enchanted by their new sister, fighting over who got to hold her and help take care of her. Life was full and chaotic, but it was everything Gwendolyn had ever dreamed of and more. She thought back sometimes to that cold winter in Deadwood, when she had been so alone and so certain that happiness was not meant for her. How wrong she had been. How grateful she was that Isaiah had appeared in her life when he did, that he had seen something in her worth loving. One evening, when Eleanor was about 6 months old, Gwendolyn stood on the porch of their home watching the sun set over their land. Isaiah came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "About how different my life is now compared to how it was before I met you," Gwendolyn said. "About how lucky I am." "I am the lucky one," Isaiah said. "You took a chance on me, on us. You built this life with me." "We built it together," Gwendolyn corrected. "Everything we have, everything we are, we did it together." They stood there in comfortable silence, watching their children play in the yard. Nathaniel was teaching Samuel how to rope a fence post, while Grace was picking wildflowers and Eleanor was sleeping peacefully in her cradle on the porch. "Do you remember what Mrs. Henderson used to say?" Gwendolyn asked suddenly. "About how no cowboy would want me, especially not in the cold." Isaiah made a sound of disgust. That woman never knew what she was talking about. "No," Gwendolyn agreed. "But you know what? I am glad she was wrong. I am glad you found me in that cold place, that you saw something in me worth pursuing. You changed my life, Isaiah. You made me believe I was worthy of love." "You were always worthy," Isaiah said fiercely. "You just needed someone to see it, and I did. From the very first moment I saw you standing in that snow, all proud and defiant despite the cold, I knew you were special. I knew you were the one I had been searching for." Gwendolyn turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. He had aged over the years, with lines around his eyes and silver beginning to show in his dark hair, but to her, he was as handsome as he had been the day they met. "And you were what I had been searching for too," she said. "I just did not know it until you found me." Isaiah kissed her, a deep, lingering kiss that held all the love and passion of their years together. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "I love you, Gwendolyn Vaughn," Isaiah said. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "And I love you, Isaiah Vaughn," Gwendolyn replied. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Thank you for choosing me, always," Isaiah said. "Always and forever." As the sun finally slipped below the horizon and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Gwendolyn felt a profound sense of peace and contentment. Her life had not turned out anything like she had expected when she first arrived in Deadwood all those years ago. It had turned out so much better. She had a husband who loved her unconditionally, who saw her strength as an asset rather than a flaw. She had 4 beautiful children who filled her days with joy and laughter. She had a home of her own, land of her own, a life she had built through hard work and determination. She was no longer the lonely, rejected woman standing in the cold, wondering if anyone would ever want her. She was loved. She was valued. She was home. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. In 1888, Tobias Vanderberg passed away peacefully in his sleep, leaving the remainder of his ranch to be divided among his children and the workers who had been loyal to him. Isaiah acquired another 100 acres, expanding their operation significantly. Their 5th and final child, a boy they named Thomas, was born in the summer of 1889. Gwendolyn was 35 by then, and she knew this would be her last pregnancy. Thomas was a happy, healthy baby, and his arrival completed their family perfectly. The older children were growing up and becoming individuals with their own dreams and ambitions. Nathaniel, at 13, was already an accomplished horseman and cowboy, working side by side with his father and talking about one day having a ranch of his own. Grace, at 11, had inherited her mother's skill with a needle and was also showing an aptitude for business, keeping the ranch's books with careful attention to detail. Samuel, at 9, had discovered a love for working with horses and showed a natural talent for training them. And Alina, at 4, was bright and curious and constantly getting into mischief. Baby Thomas was doted on by all his siblings, passed from one set of loving arms to another throughout the day. Gwendolyn's sewing business had evolved over the years. She no longer took on as much custom work, but she had begun designing and selling her own patterns, which were popular throughout the territory. She even had inquiries from as far away as Denver and Cheyenne. The extra income helped ensure their financial stability and allowed them to weather the inevitable ups and downs of ranching life. In 1892, Deadwood experienced another gold rush when new strikes were discovered in the surrounding hills. The town swelled with new arrivals, and the Vaughn Ranch found itself with ready markets for beef and horses. Isaiah was canny in his business dealings, building relationships with merchants and mining operations that ensured steady income for years to come. But success did not change who they were at their core. Isaiah remained a hard-working cowboy who loved his family above all else. Gwendolyn remained the strong, determined woman who had carved out a place for herself in a harsh land. They taught their children the values of hard work, honesty, and compassion, and made sure they understood how lucky they were to have what they had. On their 15th wedding anniversary in March 1892, Isaiah gave Gwendolyn a gift that made her cry. It was a hand-carved wooden sign that read, "Vaughn Ranch Established 1880. He had made it himself, working on it in secret for months, and it was beautiful. "I wanted something that would mark this place as ours," he said as he showed her where he planned to hang it at the entrance to their property. "Something that would let everyone know that this is the home we built together." "It is perfect," Gwendolyn said through her tears. "Everything about our life is perfect." "Not perfect," Isaiah corrected gently. "Perfect would be boring. But it is ours, and that makes it better than perfect." They held each other in the fading light, surrounded by the land they had worked so hard to claim and cultivate. In the distance, they could hear their children's voices and laughter. The house they had built glowed warmly with lamplight. The cattle grazed peacefully in the fields. This was what they had been searching for all along, Gwendolyn realized. Not wealth or status or the approval of others, but this, a place to belong, people to love, a life worth living. They had found it together in the cold, harsh landscape of South Dakota, and they had nurtured it into something beautiful and lasting. As the years rolled on, the Vaughn family continued to grow and thrive. Nathaniel eventually married a sweet-natured girl named Alice from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on a portion of the Vaughn land. Grace went away to a teaching college in Rapid City and returned with a degree and a husband, a lawyer named James who set up practice in Deadwood. Samuel took over more and more of the horse training operation, developing a reputation throughout the territory for his skill. Eleanor grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's independence and her father's kind heart. And Thomas, the baby of the family, showed signs of being a natural rancher like his father. Gwendolyn and Isaiah grew older together, their hair turning silver, their bodies showing the wear of years of hard work. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper and stronger with each passing year, tempered by shared experiences and mutual respect. On cold winter nights, they would sit together by the fire, sometimes in comfortable silence, sometimes talking about their memories and their hopes for their children and grandchildren. Isaiah would hold Gwendolyn's hand, marveling that it fit so perfectly in his own, and she would rest her head on his shoulder, grateful beyond words for the life they had built. "You ever think about that first winter?" Isaiah asked one night. "When I first met you?" "Sometimes," Gwendolyn admitted. "I remember thinking I was going to die alone in that cold place. I remember believing that no one would ever want me." "I am glad you were wrong," Isaiah said, kissing the top of her head. "I am glad I found you when I did." "I am glad you saw me," Gwendolyn said softly. "Really saw me for who I was. You gave me the greatest gift anyone could give, Isaiah. You made me believe in myself." "You did the same for me," Isaiah said. "Before I met you, I was just drifting, moving from place to place with no real purpose. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something lasting. You gave me a home." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. Outside, snow was falling softly, covering the land in a blanket of white. But inside, they were warm and safe, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. The spring of 1902 brought their first great-grandchild, a boy born to Nathaniel's eldest daughter. Gwendolyn, now 48 years old, held the tiny baby in her arms and marveled at the passage of time. It seemed like just yesterday that she had been holding Nathaniel for the first time, and now here was his grandchild, a new generation to carry on the family legacy. "What do you think, Isaiah?" she asked her husband, who was peering at the baby with wonder. "Are we really old enough to be great-grandparents?" "Apparently so," Isaiah said with a laugh. He was 52 now, his face deeply lined but his eyes still as blue and clear as they had been the day they met. "Though I do not feel any different than I did when we first married." "Liar," Gwendolyn teased. "I see you groaning when you get out of bed in the morning. I hear you complaining about your aching back." "That is just the weather," Isaiah protested. "Nothing to do with age." They smiled at each other, the familiar, comfortable smile of two people who knew each other inside and out. 25 years of marriage had taught them how to read each other's moods, how to support each other through difficulties, how to celebrate each other's triumphs. They were partners in every sense of the word, and neither could imagine life without the other. As the years continued to pass, they gradually stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, letting Nathaniel and Samuel take over more of the responsibilities. But they remained active and involved, offering advice when asked, helping with the grandchildren, and maintaining the garden and animals close to the main house. Gwendolyn finally gave up taking on sewing commissions, though she still made clothes for her grandchildren and created quilts as gifts for weddings and births. Her patterns continued to sell well, providing a small but steady income that she saved for her children and grandchildren. Isaiah spent his days working with the horses, training the younger stock and mentoring his grandsons in the skills he had spent a lifetime perfecting. He was content in a way he had never imagined possible, surrounded by family and living on land that bore his name. On their 30th wedding anniversary in March 1907, the entire family gathered for a celebration. The house was packed with children, grandchildren, and the first few great-grandchildren. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and countless toasts to the couple who had started it all. As Gwendolyn looked around at the gathered crowd, seeing the faces of the family she and Isaiah had created, she was overwhelmed with emotion. All of this, everything in this room existed because a lonely cowboy had stopped to offer her a ride on a cold winter day. Because he had seen something in her worth pursuing, because he had said those magic words, "I have been searching for you." Isaiah found her standing alone on the porch, taking a moment away from the chaos inside. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, a gesture that had become familiar over 3 decades of marriage. "Happy anniversary, my love," he said softly. "Happy anniversary," Gwendolyn replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Thank you for 30 years of happiness." "Thank you for saying yes when I asked to court you," Isaiah said. "Thank you for taking a chance on a rough cowboy who had nothing to offer but his love." "You had everything to offer," Gwendolyn said, turning in his arms to face him. "You offered me yourself, and that was more than enough." Isaiah kissed her, and even after 30 years it still made her heart race. "Here is to 30 more," he said when they finally broke apart. "And 30 after that," Gwendolyn added. "I never want to stop loving you, Isaiah Vaughn." "Then do not," Isaiah said simply. "Just keep loving me and I will keep loving you and we will be fine." Inside, someone struck up a waltz on the fiddle and Isaiah offered Gwendolyn his hand. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Vaughn?" "You may have every dance," Gwendolyn said, taking his hand. "For the rest of our lives, you may have every dance." They danced together in the soft spring twilight, surrounded by the love and laughter of their family, on the land they had claimed and cultivated, in the home they had built together. The cold winter when they had first met seemed like a lifetime ago, like something that had happened to different people. But Gwendolyn would never forget those dark days, because they had taught her something important. They had taught her that even when everything seems hopeless, even when it feels like you are alone in the cold and no one will ever want you, life can surprise you. Love can find you in the most unexpected places. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, someone will appear who has been searching for you, who sees exactly who you are and loves you not in spite of it, but because of it. She had found that person in Isaiah Vaughn, and he had found that person in her. Together, they had created a legacy of love that would last for generations, a testament to the power of seeing and being seen, of choosing and being chosen. As the music swelled and Isaiah spun her around the porch, Gwendolyn laughed with pure joy. This was her life, the one she had fought for and claimed and built with her own 2 hands and the help of the man who loved her. And it was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined on that cold winter day so long ago. The story that had started with rejection and loneliness had become one of love and belonging. The woman who had been told no cowboy would want her had found one who had been searching for her his whole life. And together, they had proven that the only opinions that mattered were their own, and the only love that counted was the love they gave each other. Years continued to flow like a river, steady and unstoppable. In 1915, Isaiah and Gwendolyn celebrated their 38th anniversary surrounded by 4 generations of family. Isaiah was 65 years old, his hair completely white now, his movements slower but still sure. Gwendolyn was 61, her face lined with the evidence of a life fully lived, her hands gnarled from decades of work with needle and thread. They had weathered drought and prosperity, loss and joy, heartbreak and triumph. 2 of their grandchildren had died in infancy, losses that had broken their hearts but not their spirits. They had supported their children through their own struggles and celebrated their successes. They had watched Deadwood transform from a rough gold rush town into a proper city with electric lights and telephone lines. The world was changing rapidly, but the core of their lives remained constant. They still lived on their ranch, though it was now run primarily by their sons and grandsons. They still loved each other with the fierce devotion that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. They still found joy in simple things: a beautiful sunset, a grandchild's laughter, a quiet evening spent together. On a warm summer evening in 1917, Isaiah fell ill. What started as a simple cold quickly developed into pneumonia. Gwendolyn nursed him with all the skill and determination she had shown 40 years earlier, but this time, his body could not fight off the infection. He grew weaker each day, despite the efforts of the doctor who came from Deadwood. On a clear night in August, with Gwendolyn holding his hand, and their children and grandchildren gathered around his bed, Isaiah Vaughn took his last breath. He died peacefully, a small smile on his face, surrounded by the family he loved and on the land he had claimed. Gwendolyn felt like a part of her soul had been ripped away. For 40 years, Isaiah had been her partner, her love, her best friend. The idea of living without him was unbearable, but as she sat beside his body, still holding his cold hand, she knew she had to find a way. Their children and grandchildren needed her. The legacy they had built together needed to be preserved and protected. They buried Isaiah on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a simple granite marker bearing his name and dates. The entire community turned out for the funeral, testament to the respect and affection Isaiah had earned over his decades in the area. People shared stories of his kindness, his integrity, his skill as a rancher and horseman. But the story Gwendolyn held closest to her heart was their own. The story of how he had found her in the cold, how he had seen her when no one else did, how he had loved her completely and without reservation for 40 years. That was the legacy she would carry forward, the gift he had given her that would never fade. In the years that followed, Gwendolyn continued living on the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She spent her days in the garden, quilting and telling stories to the youngest generation about their grandfather and the life he had built. She made sure they understood what he had stood for, the values he had held dear. On cold winter nights, she would sit by the fire and remember. She remembered that first ride through the snow, Isaiah's arms around her, his warmth cutting through the bitter cold. She remembered their first dinner together, the way he had looked at her like she was precious. She remembered their wedding day, the birth of each of their children, the countless quiet moments that had made up a life. She lived to the remarkable age of 77, passing away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1931. Her children found her in the morning, looking serene and at peace, a smile on her lips. They buried her beside Isaiah on that hillside overlooking the ranch, their markers side by side for eternity. The Vaughn Ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family, a testament to what two people could build when they refused to accept the limitations others tried to place on them. And though the people of Deadwood, who had once whispered that no cowboy would want Gwendolyn Lawson, were long gone, the story of her love with Isaiah Vaughn lived on. It was a story told at family gatherings, passed down from grandparents to grandchildren, a reminder that love can find you in the most unexpected places, in the coldest and harshest circumstances. It was a story about seeing and being seen, about the courage it takes to be yourself, and the beauty of finding someone who loves you exactly as you are. And at its heart, it was a story about hope, about how a lonely woman standing in the bitter cold of a South Dakota winter had been found by a man who had been searching for her. About how those simple words, "I have been searching for you," had transformed two lives and created a legacy that would last for generations. The cold that had once threatened to consume Gwendolyn had been no match for the warmth of Isaiah's love. And together, they had proven that what others said did not matter, that their own belief in each other was the only truth that counted. They had built something real and lasting, a love story that would inspire their descendants for generations to come, a reminder that even in the coldest, darkest times, love can light the way home.